Hello everyone, welcome back. In this video, we will see what is Hibernate, we will see its architecture and few of its important components. So without any further delay, let's start. So before we deep dig into what is Hibernate, first we need to understand what is JDBC. As JDBC stands for Java Database Connectivity, it is clear that this specific component is used for connecting the Java application to database servers. So JDBC is an Java API to connect and execute the queries with the databases. Now let's see the steps which were involved while connecting our Java application to a database using JDBC. First, we need to get a connection object using the URL, which is the connection URL that contains the database which we are using, the database server and DB name. Then also we need username and password to connect to that database. After that, using that connection object, we need to create a statement. So once we have the statement, now using the statement itself, we can execute any database related query. And whatever database query is getting executed, it will return the result in the form of result set. So result set is also an object which is available in java.sql. So when we execute statement dot execute query method, and in the parameter we can provide the query in the form of string. So here we are doing select star from to do. So to do here is a table, and select star means we want to select all the columns and all the rows from this specific table, and whatever result it will return, that will be stored in object rs. So here if you see, we have to execute a lot of steps here just to get a simple detail from a table. So in a way, we have to write a lot of boilerplate code and we need to maintain it as well. So now let's see what are the issues with JDBC. So first one is there is no inbuilt transaction management. So here you can see if there are multiple queries getting executed and one of them got failed, and if we need to make it a atomic operation, in that case we need to maintain it separately. So that provision is not here in case of JDBC. Second one is queries are DB specific. So here, suppose I'm executing a query which is specific to Oracle database, but in future, if the database has been changed from Oracle to Postgres, in that case, the queries also may need to be changed. There can be some syntax difference between the databases. Third one is too much of boilerplate code. So that we have already seen that we have to write a lot of code just to get the connection and statement as well. Then also it's not good option for the large projects. And the last one is tight coupling of application with database. So as we are explicitly mentioning the queries here itself, so it is making it tightly coupled with the database itself. So suppose if we want to change the database, we need to make a lot of changes in the code as well. So how to overcome these issues which are there with JDBC? So for that we have ORM. ORM is nothing but object relational mapping. ORM is a programming technique for providing an abstract layer on DB operations. That means we will be performing operations on the objects, but in turn the ORM framework, whichever we will be using, that will convert all those operations and persist it in the database tables as well. So in a way, this creates a virtual database object that can be used from within the programming languages such as Java. Now let's see what is Hibernate. Hibernate is a Java framework that simplifies the development of Java application to interact with databases. It maps Java classes to database tables, and the operations performed on Java classes will reflect in the database tables. So I hope this is clear. So if you have any doubts, please do comment in the comment box. Now let's see what are the features of Hibernate. So first one is either no or very less knowledge of SQL is required, because it has added an abstraction layer on top of your Java application and database. So you don't need to write the actual SQL statements. Whatever we'll be doing, we will be playing with the Java objects only. And whatever changes we are making in the Java objects, those will get persisted in the database tables as well. So in that case, very less knowledge of SQL is required for a Java developer. Second is it works well with all the SQL compliant databases. Third one, which is also very important one, is cache support is available, which is actually not there by default in JDBC. So Hibernate provides first level cache and second level cache and also query level cache as well, which is not available in case of JDBC. So cache is actually used to enhance the performance of all the DB operations. The last one but not the least one is transaction management. So as we were discussing, there was no transaction management available in case of JDBC, but Hibernate provides a mechanism for transaction management itself. So here you can see this is how the high level of Hibernate structure is. We have Pojo classes, one class per table we can say as of now, and we have database on the other end as well, and in between we have Hibernate. So whatever changes we are making in our Pojo classes, which are actually mapped to some of the tables, all those changes will be reflected in the database as well using Hibernate. Now let's see few main components of Hibernate as well. The main components Hibernate are configuration, session factory, session, transaction, query, and criteria. Now let's check these components one by one in detail. So what is a configuration object? The configuration object is the first Hibernate object that we'll be creating in any Hibernate application. It is usually created only once during the application initialization. It provides two key components. First one is database connection and second one is class mapping to the tables. So this configuration object is being created from the metadata file, which can be an XML file where we are defining the complete database related details, and one of the XML file where we define the class to table mapping. The second component is session factory object. So Hibernate session factory is a factory class through which we get sessions and perform database operations. It provides us three methods through which we can get the session object. First one is get current session, second is open session, and third one is open stateless session. Get current session will return us if any session is currently there, it will return the same session. And if we call open session, it will create a new session and return it. And in case of third one, it will open a stateless session where state is not maintained. The next is session object. A session is used to get a physical connection with a database. So persistent objects are saved and retrieved through session objects only. So session object is the way where actually the Hibernate is connecting to database. The main function of session is to offer create, read, and delete operation for instances of mapped entity classes. Now let's see various states of the instances in session object. First one is transient. So when a new instance of persistence class is created, which is not associated with session and has no representation in the database, that is known as transient state. The second state is persistent state. So a transient instance can be made persistent by associating it with the session. So any changes which are happening to the objects which are in persistent state will be saved back to the database as well. The third one is detached. So once we close the Hibernate session, the persistence instance will become detached instance. Next is transaction object. A transaction is a sequence of operations which work as atomic unit. It only completes if all the operations inside the transaction is successful. A transaction follows the ACID properties of database. ACID means atomicity, consistency, isolation, and durability. Now let's see an example with code how the transaction object is created. So here we have one transaction object trans obj, and we also have a session object session obj. So we know that we can get session from the session factory itself. So after creating the factory itself, we are calling the open session. And if you remember, open session is a function provided by session factory to create a new session. So once session object is received, we can get a transaction from session object here. So here session object dot begin transaction. So from this point, a new transaction has been started. So then after that, we can perform some operations which are related to the entities or database. And once all those operations are done, in the end, we need to commit the transaction object. So that we can do transaction object dot commit method. So with that, all the changes, all the operations that we have performed between the begin transaction and commit transaction, all those will be persisted in the database. Next is query object. Query object is used to retrieve the data from database. You can use either SQL or Hibernate query language, which is also known as HQL. A query instance is obtained by calling session.createQuery. The query object is used to bind query parameters, limit query results, and execute the query as well. Now let's see the query as well with the code example. So now we have the transaction, and using session.begin transaction, we are starting a transaction. After that, we are creating an object of query queue, and using session object session.createQuery and providing the actual query in the form of string here. We are updating the user table, setting name is equal to colon name. This is the parameter where id is equal to colon id. So these two parameters are here. So now we need to set these parameters as well for query. So to do that, we have q is the instance of query, q dot set parameter, name is the first parameter name that we have, and what value that we want to update. So here we want to update name as lazy programmer, and where we want to update, that is the second parameter. So for id, we are assigning id as 101. So once this assignment is done, now using query dot execute update, we can execute this specific query which we have created in the database. And once it has executed, as it's an update query, it will return the number of rows affected. So that we are storing in an integer variable status. And once all these steps are complete, we need to mark the transaction as commit as well. So using transaction object dot commit, we will be able to commit all these changes which are done after the begin transaction to the database. The last point is criteria object. So Hibernate provides ways of manipulating objects, and in turn data available in RDBMS table is returned. So one of the method is criteria API. It allows you to build up a criteria query object programmatically, where you can apply filtration rules and logical conditions on objects, and based on all the conditions, data can be retrieved from the database. Now let's see this with an example as well. So criteria is the class for which we need to create an object. So here we are creating CR object, and using session only we can create the criteria. So session dot create criteria, and there we need to provide the class name with dot class as well. So for employee, we are going to create few criteria that we'll explain here. So the first one, to get the records having salary more than 2000, we can create a criteria like restrictions dot gt is for greater than, and then name of the column, and then value. And this restriction has to be added to criteria. So for that, we need to add cr dot add and whatever restriction we are defining. So similar to greater than, we have less than and equal as well. Now let's check the next one. To get the records having first name starting with lazy, so similarly, we can do restrictions dot like. So first is the column name and then the value, similar to the SQL queries where conditions how we define. We can do a case insensitive search as well using I like here. Next one is to get the records having salary between 1000 and 2000. So for that, we have restrictions dot between value. So here we need to provide three arguments. First one is the column, and other two are the lower and higher bound between which we want to check the value of that column. We can also check if a given property is null. So using restrictions dot is null, we can define the column name for which we want to check. In addition to that, we can have logical operations like or and as well. So for that, suppose we have two criteria like salary and name, and we want to add the conditions in such a way that either salary matches or name matches. So in that case, we will define like this. We can define two separate criterions here. So these criterions will be added to the criteria in the end. So first we have defined salary restriction dot greater than 2000. So this is our first condition. And second one is if name is starting with lazy. So that is I like. So in this case, it is case insensitive. And now we want to add these two criterions under a logical expression. So for that, we'll be using class logical expression. Name of the reference is or expression, and then restrictions dot or, and as a parameters we'll provide all the criterions for which we want to apply the logical or. And once it is done, we can add this logical expression to the criteria object here itself. So that was the basic introduction of Hibernate and its components. In our next sessions, we will see more detailed components like cache in Hibernate, and also few more hands-on examples as well. So if you have any queries, please do comment. And for your feedback as well, please comment, like, and share. Thanks for watching. See you next time.